Good morning on this Thursday morning, and thank you for joining us for the Carrie Barrett Show live. As you know, drop your questions and your comments in the chat, and I will answer them at the end. So today we're talking about the difference between being a speaker who is good on stage and a speaker who is good on camera, and why those are two distinct, overlapping, but distinct skill sets, and how you can develop both, what the differences are, how you can overcome that, and how you can develop both. And I've posted a few times over the last week or so about the Republican State of the Union rebuttal by Alabama Junior Senator Katie Britt. And I don't mean to belabor that point or that particular situation. However, there are a lot of lessons to be gleaned, from that situation. Excuse me while I get a little drink of water here. It's like the first time I've really spoken this morning, so my voice is a little rusty. Anyway, it's not a political debate. It's not about whether Katie Britt's ideas or thoughts were right or inaccurate or wrong. It's about that particular moment. Katie Britt, if you've ever seen her speak extemporaneously, can actually deliver a compelling message, regardless of whether you believe in what she's saying or not, or you align with her politically. I'm just strictly talking about the message and the way it's delivered. However, in that particular moment, that high stakes situation, it was very, very clear that the skills that she has speaking in front of a live audience did not translate to her being able to deliver to a camera without any feedback. And oh, by the way, read a script, which I'm guessing, I don't know who trained her. It was not adequate training, but I'm guessing that script was also written for her. And while she may have practiced it, she didn't know how to restructure it so that she could deliver it with credibility or believability. I think the main takeaway from that is she may have said, again, if you align with her politically, she probably said all the right things for you, but it was very hard to buy into what she said because of the way that she said it. So while speaking on camera and speaking on stage do have some overlapping skills, there are some distinct differences in the way that those skills are applied and in the way that you receive feedback as well. So for example, Katie Britt was in an environment somewhat similar to the one in which I'm delivering now. And by that, I certainly the stakes were higher for her. But what I mean by that is physically the setup was very similar. She was in her home. She was in a quiet room. There was not a live audience in front of her. She was delivering to a camera with a live audience on the other side. And she had a script. I don't have a script right now. Certainly have some talking points, some things I want to make sure that I don't forget, but her environment was similar physically. And at the end result was similar to what I'm doing right now. Again, with the difference in certainly the stakes of the situation. So that's a recent example. If you haven't seen her rebuttal, I would actually suggest finding it on YouTube and going back and taking a look at it. It's about 17 minutes. You don't have to watch the whole thing, but it'll give you a good background and an understanding of some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing I want to dive into is the differences between, and I'm going to use public speaking in this case to mean talking in front of a live audience, whether you're up on a stage and you're doing a keynote, or whether you are delivering a client pitch in person, or you're hosting some sort of company meeting. I'm going to talk about through the lens to mean anything from live streams like this to media opportunities to not necessarily recorded social media, because that's a different beast and you can manipulate the output through post-production, i.e. editing, but virtual client pitches, virtual town halls, virtual team meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So those are going to be sort of the environments that the on-camera element is contained to for the purposes of this discussion, and public speaking will be anything that falls into speaking in front of a live audience, wherever the case may be, but in person. So the live audience, the primary difference, and you'll find some people actually really prefer speaking to a live audience, and some people much prefer speaking to a camera. And the reason is sort of the inverse of the same coin, right? It's the flip side of the same coin. People like speaking in front of an audience because there is a little bit of back and forth. If you're somewhat skilled at speaking, you are better able to read the room in the moment and make real-time adjustments. So either amping up your energy or perhaps slightly changing the way that you deliver so that you have an engaged audience. People, many of whom do not like to speak on the stage, prefer to speak in front of a camera because it's almost like being behind a podium. You're not entirely exposed. You're not standing up there on a stage being seen from head to toe. There's a little bit of safety for some people in being removed from that live audience. Where the difficulty comes into, good morning, Juan, where the difficulty comes into play is that you can't read the room. And you're talking to, let's say a little green dot, as I am in this particular case. I mean, that's what I'm seeing. And so for some who are not used to that environment, it is very unnatural, and it also feels incredibly unnatural. You can't read the room. I don't know what you're doing. And it's very easy to get in your head. And then you sort of have these two divergent trains of thought. One is what you should be doing, and one is the fact that you have no idea what the people who are watching you are doing or who are listening to you. And it's very easy to get distracted by that unless you've done this time and time again. I remember the first time that I delivered a webinar after I'd left the news industry. I had been on air. If you're not familiar with my story, I had been on air as an anchor and reporter for 20 years by the time I left that industry. And in massive markets, New York City, where there potentially were millions of people watching live, and all the mistakes, I was very, very comfortable in that environment. Yet when I delivered my first webinar as a business owner, when COVID hit, I was about 15 minutes in, and it was an entirely different scenario. Certainly speaking to the camera, the same skills apply. However, I remember my lips going numb. I remember thinking I have no idea what anybody is doing on the other side. Are people even listening? Are they there? If they are listening, do I sound like an idiot? And I started to spiral a little bit myself. Now, I was able to put myself back in place and get myself redirected and back on track because I'm so familiar with speaking on camera. But the difference for me, anyway, in that environment was I didn't have a cast of characters around me, meaning I didn't have my co-anchor, I didn't have the weather person, I didn't have traffic person, I didn't have reporters, I didn't have a producer in my ear telling me what was coming up next. And for an anchor or a reporter, that gives you a little bit of a similar feeling as being live in front of an audience, meaning you have somebody or people around you who are helping you carry things, or are helping you course correct, or are changing the energy if things need to be changed. And so while the skills of speaking on camera and on stage are similar, the feedback and the way that you deliver is slightly different. And oftentimes, again, to harken back to the Katie Britt's situation, you don't realize until you're in front of the camera or up on the stage that you don't actually know what you're doing. And it's a very, very disconcerting feeling. And it is panic inducing for a lot of people if you don't have the skills to redirect yourself, or you don't really know how to deliver well in either of those environments. So for the live audience, public speaking, again, you've got the benefits of feedback from the audience. You've got the benefits of energy in the room. Do you feel perhaps a little bit more exposed? Absolutely, because you're up there in front of them. I'm working with a client right now who we've only been working together for a couple of weeks, but this person gave their first keynote since we started working together. And there were about 200 or so people in the room. And there were a few who my client just couldn't get, was not able to bring them into the fold, if you will, and get them to engage. And my client could see them sort of scrolling through their phone or doing other things. And that was an incredibly difficult experience because we hadn't jumped into how do you handle that sort of energy? How do you bring people back in? So there is a little bit more exposure. On the on camera side, you're protected, but again, it's very easy to spiral, especially if you don't know how it is that you're going to be communicating, you don't understand the challenges of the microphone, or you don't recognize that it's going to feel very much like you're talking to yourself for half an hour or for an hour if you haven't sort of immersed yourself in that and experienced it at least a few times, so that you know how to manage those feelings and stay in control and continue to deliver the message and try and bring in the audience in any way that you can when you're up in front of that lens. So let's talk now about the differences physically between delivering on a stage and delivering in front of a lens, right? The way that I'm doing now. So when you're on a stage, and you may have heard this if you have any familiarity with acting, or you've studied acting, or you've taken acting classes, you might recognize this particular phrase, and that it's you're always speaking to the person in the back of the room. So, you're on a Broadway stage, or you are up on a stage behind a podium delivering a keynote. Let's say you have 1,000 people there, and the back row is 200 yards away from you. That's the row that you have to reach in order to know that you've reached everyone. So it's why gestures on stage are so much bigger than they are in real life. Aside from the fact that there's a very wide field of vision, it's not narrow the way that it is on a camera. It's very wide. There's a lot of other distractions. And so big gestures are not distracting the way that they may be on a camera. Rather, they attract the attention of the person in the back row, and it makes them sit up and take notice. It's the reason stage makeup, for example, is so much heavier than real life makeup is, because again, you want the person in the back row to be able to see your facial expressions and what your eyes are doing. So everything is designed on the stage to reach the person in the back row. Now on camera, you are also conceptually doing something similar, but there are different barriers. I mentioned the field of vision on stage being very wide and broad. On a camera, it's very narrow. It is this little rectangle or square in which you are viewing me in this case, which means your focus is hyper centralized on what's going on in this little box. Aside from, large gestures that may not even cause you to bat an eye on stage are very noticeable when you are on camera. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them. It means that you should use them in moderation, and you should understand a little bit about what goes into them. The other thing is that you have taken a 3D person, right? So you've got width, you've got length, and you've got height, and you have made them 2D. So it's height and width. And so that has a flattening effect on energy, aside from the fact that you are now navigating through a bunch of hardware and software to get the message across as well. So I've got my camera, and I've got my microphone, and I've got the monitor, and I've got an internet connection, which thankfully is pretty solid. But if it's not, that's an additional thing that you have to overcome. Now, all of that designed to reach the person who is conceptually at the back of the room. However, being on camera, at least in this environment, is also much more intimate than that. Meaning, here's my microphone. This is your ear, and it's about 12 inches away from my mouth. And this right here is your eye. it's my camera, and it's about 18 inches away from me. And just give me a second. I put a smudge on that camera, so I'm going to wipe it off. Right. So it's a much more intimate environment, meaning you are technically closer to me. And it was probably about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I did a live stream on proxemics, which is the study of personal space, interpersonal, intimate, public, etc., and how you can replicate that with the camera. You're bringing all of that together here with also understanding that I am about 18 inches away from your eye, and then you have your space from the monitor as well. So I'm guessing you're probably sitting about 18 inches away from your phone or your computer as well. So we're about 3 feet apart. It's a much more intimate environment than somebody who's sitting 200 yards away from me. If you're doing similar gestures on the camera, they may look sort of bombastic, to use a word, just too big for the environment and distracting. And so it's bringing all of those elements together. And it's interesting to note that aside from not having the benefit of immediate audience feedback and, facial expressions and understanding how to maintain energy, because let's not forget, when you are generally speaking in front of a camera, you don't have the length of a stage to sort of tell the story or make your point, or to be able to go around and sort of hit each person in the audience, through your movement. Your stage is here. And so you have to somehow fit the physical of your story into this little box as well. And all of these elements come into play when you are delivering. It is interesting to note, and I used to be one of these, how many on-air people, by on-air, I mean on television, anchors and reporters, really do not enjoy speaking to a live audience. And the inverse is true as well. You would think that an anchor or reporter would be very, very comfortable getting up in front of a crowd, and it's just not the case. And I'm not going to name anybody, but some big names, people that I know from working that industry for so long, won't do a public speaking engagement. They just won't do it because they're too uncomfortable with it, because the skill sets are different and the environment is different. And it feels very vulnerable for them to get up in front of a live audience, because again, with the screens and the cameras, there is that feeling that you are a little bit removed and you are sort of behind the podium anyway, conceptually, rather than walking out on the stage in front of everybody. And again, the inverse is true as well. There's plenty of people, again, Katie Britt coming to mind, who are generally pretty good speakers in front of a live audience, but put them in front of a camera and oh my gosh, things begin to spiral. When I first started, if you've heard my story, and I talk about this fairly regularly, when I first started in the news industry, or realized that I wanted to go into the news industry, I was bad at both things. I was bad at speaking and I was bad at being on camera. I had to figure out how to navigate both of them. The camera element came first because I did that, so I had to do it so often. I did it every day from the day I started in the industry. The speaking in person element came a little bit later. I knew that I needed to continue, especially to work on that environment, because if I wanted to, host fundraisers or, speak at a graduation or speak on behalf of my employer or myself for that matter, or host an event, I was going to have to get good at speaking, not just on a camera, but on a stage as well. And I really didn't begin to do that element until I was probably about 5 to 7-ish years in the business before I was recognized enough that people would actually want me to come and speak, aside from being in like the smaller markets. And I realized very quickly that that was a whole different skill set. I knew I was nervous going into it in a way that I wasn't nervous being on the news any longer, but I didn't fully realize how different the skills are between the two. And if I go back and look at one of the first public speaking opportunities I was presented with and accepted while I was still in the news industry, I hadn't put a lot of thought into how I was going to deliver. And I sort of had my arms crossed and I was sort of rocking back and forth on the stage. And I was in one place. I mean, I was very clearly nervous. My voice wasn't shaky or anything like that, but closed off like this and rocking is distracting and not a good look. And it's when I went back and watched that video that I realized, okay, these skills don't actually completely align. Again, conceptually, there are some similarities, but it's understanding that one doesn't necessarily translate to the other. I mean, certainly, if I was on the news and I was, arms folded across and rocking back and forth, that's not a good look. But I hadn't really pieced together that it wouldn't work on stage either. It sounds really silly, but until you're up there doing it and people are watching, you don't know fully how you're going to react or what sort of idiosyncrasies or quirks or what sort of crutches you may have unconsciously developed that you're going to lean into until you actually do it. It is important to try and master both. I think as, I don't know entirely the audience. I can see some of you, but I don't know exactly who's watching. But certainly if you are a business owner or an executive or you are a lawyer, I've been working with a lot of lawyers lately, you understand hopefully why it's important to be able to speak compellingly. You may not know really what being a good speaker means. You may know when you see somebody speak that you felt like you were on the edge of your seat and you were interested and invested in what they were saying. If you've watched a TED Talk or you've gone to see anybody speak in person, you may know as you're walking out, wow, that was fantastic, but not really be able to pinpoint the tactics that they used when they were delivering to make it fantastic. You may also recognize when you are watching a TED Talk on YouTube that something was really hitting and really landing with you as you watched. Aside from the message, they were able to deliver it compellingly, but you might not really understand, again, what the tactics are that they used to deliver that in a compelling way. So you may recognize that it's important to be able to speak, is what I'm getting at through all of this, but not really understand what it takes to be compelling. And if you are in any of those buckets that I mentioned before, executive, business owner, lawyer, getting in front of live people, not necessarily one-to-one, but in a one-to-many sort of situation, up on a stage, doing some sort of seminar, speaking to a group of people, you recognize why those are important for awareness, for visibility, for client acquisition, for positioning yourself as a leader in your niche or area. You may wonder then how does that why do I need to be good? If I'm good at that, why do I also need to be good at speaking on camera? And hopefully the pandemic answered that question for you, but increasingly the model of business and communication that we adopted during the pandemic is becoming sort of standard in the way that we conduct ourselves in our business. So even if your team is not entirely remote, and even if you go into the office yourself on a semi-regular basis, there are myriad of opportunities, not just for positioning yourself as a leader, but also for visibility, for awareness, for client acquisition, et cetera, that come with speaking on camera. I like to say speaking on camera is the new public speaking because it very much is. It allows you to connect with people who you may not have, you don't have the time or energy or bandwidth to connect with in person constantly anyway. If you remember when we were doing everything in person, you had to go to networking events and it was hit or miss whether the right people were going to be there. And when you are good on camera, not only are you able to create digital content that, by the way, does your networking for you, but also lives forever. So if you do meet someone at a networking event, or you are given a referral and somebody wants to find out who you are, where do they go? They go to your website or they go to your social media. And for the business community, where that social media connection begins is generally LinkedIn. And they look at what you have out there. What have you put up? What's on your profile? How are you positioning yourself? Aside from, and I'm not going to dive too heavily into this, but just as something to remember, I'm sure everybody's reading the same articles that I am about how AI is disrupting the business model for any company that goes or charges through billable hours. So specifically, I'm talking about, marketing agencies, certainly PR agencies, law firms, 100%. So if you are, I'll dive into this just a touch more. If you are running your business on a billable hour model, and what used to take you, 20 hours to do is now done in a matter of minutes because of AI, where do you make up that additional 19 and 3/4 hours, right? You're going to have to bring in new clients or change your billing model to an output-based model or a results-based model. But assuming you want to bring in more clients, you have to get in front of more clients, which means you're going to need to start doing things like hosting webinars, which are so much more convenient than doing in-person speaking communications. Also should still be part of your plan, but you got to be doing webinars, and you got to be doing them well, because the challenge is not just getting people to attend, it's then also keeping their butts in the seats so they're watching clear through to the end. I digress a little bit, but I really wanted to hone in on why that on-camera component is going to be so important, especially moving forward. And I should mention as well, if you're not seeking out media opportunities, meaning if you are again, I'll use lawyer for an example. If you are a lawyer, either your own lawyer or you work at a large firm, if you are not seeking out on camera media opportunities, if you're not looking to position yourself on CNBC or Fox News, Fox Business, or MSNBC, you are missing a huge opportunity for a few reasons. Not only is earned media free, but it comes with a massive dose of built-in credibility and authority. And to stick with the law firm sort of analogy or example in this case, it's not as if somebody wakes up and says, "Oh, I'm going to get rear-ended today in my car, and I'm going to sue somebody because of it." As a lawyer or a law firm, you must constantly be in front of the right people so that you are top of mind. And media is a great way to do that. But again, don't expect to sit down at the desk with an anchor or virtually for a Zoom interview and expect to knock it out of the park. You may get all the words right, but if your audience tunes out because you're not interesting, you've lost the whole opportunity. Is nothing. So I hope that explains a little bit of why I'm talking about, but mastery in both is important. And not to keep turning the example to me, but the reason I was able to grow my business is first because I was able to start out creating video and being seen, creating visibility for myself, but then also that translated into speaking opportunities as well. So first speaking at smaller events, universities or chambers or whatever, and then gradually expanding into much bigger opportunities, speaking at Chief, doing keynotes for well-paid keynotes for very large organizations and companies, etc. So both of those skills are important, but distinct. And I hope I've explained a little bit on why they're important and how they're distinct. I want to go into right now some of the overlapping skills that are between the two. So certainly confidence and preparedness are key skills and mindsets, if you will, that apply to both scenarios. So preparing, absolutely 100%. Do I prepare as much as I used to? I don't, because it's become so automatic. I'd go into a newsroom and sit down at the desk to get ready to do a newscast, and I probably hadn't read any of my scripts in advance because I've gotten so good at adjusting and handling things on the fly. But for somebody who's somewhat new, either being on camera or on the stage or both, preparedness is a huge part of that. Certainly confidence is as well, but the confidence doesn't come first. That's where a lot of people get this wrong. They want to develop the confidence and then do the thing. You have to do the thing, and having small successes and wins or large ones is what eventually builds the confidence, right? And that's certainly how it worked for me as well in both environments, on camera and on the stage. Articulation, voice control. One of the biggest mistakes is that people assume when they're on the stage or they're in front of the camera, it's their physical self that is the most important. And it is important, but it's the voice that most people get wrong, meaning it's monotone or it's delivered with a certain staccato. You'll hear me use those terms often when I'm talking about delivering speech or on camera. And when your voice gets small, when you reduce your vocal range, your variety is really what that comes down to. Everything else reduces in its wake. So if you don't have your voice on point, the rest of it doesn't really matter. People are not going to tune in. They're not going to tune in to watch your facial expressions or your body language. They may try and stick around for the message if they're really into whatever it is, invested in whatever it is that you're talking about. But if your voice doesn't underscore your message, meaning if your voice is small and monotone and you say something like, "I'm really excited to be here," the body language is what punches up, and the voice is what punches, the words are what punch down. So your body language in that particular case has to do with the way that you're using your voice, and your voice is not showing that you're excited to be there. In fact, it's showing the opposite. I hope that makes sense. It was a little bit convoluted as I was trying to explain it, but I hope that makes sense. So your vocal variety is a huge overlapping an important skill set when you're delivering on camera or you're delivering on the stage. Engaging storytelling. And if you're not sure what your story is, that's something that you need to suss out. What is the story? What is the soundbite? What are the talking points? What is the beginning of the story, the arc, or the hero's journey, whatever it is, and the ending point? And what are the stories that resonate for your audience? And that's something that I work with some of my clients regarding. Let's suss out what those stories are. And then you have to be able to tell them well. You can't just rattle off a series of sentences or data and have that be a compelling story. If you remember the difference between, I don't know if when you were a kid, you ever had to read out loud in class, individuals, you went through a novel or whatever it was that you were reading, and you each had to read a page or a paragraph or whatever it is. Or maybe your grandfather sat you on his knee and read a story, and he got into character, and he used different voices and different pacing, and then you had somebody else who just sort of read it, each word the same. Which one is more compelling? The story could be exactly the same, the words, but you have to be able to not only suss out what the story is, but then deliver it in a way that is with conviction and inspires your audience to do something and makes them remember the story as well. And then adapting to feedback. They're different in both environments. When you are on stage, you have real-time feedback, and that may make you nervous, and it may be something that you appreciate, but you have to be able to adapt to it in the moment. When you're on camera and there's no one around you, like it is for me right now, you have to still be able to adapt. It means you have to recognize in real time yourself. Is my energy waning? Have I not dropped the story in a while that will re-engage the audience? And you yourself have to course correct. You have to be delivering, also giving yourself feedback, real time, same time, and course correcting yourself. So that element is executed slightly differently when you're on the camera versus on the stage, but it's still conceptually the same skill. I hope that makes sense. All right. So, how do you develop then skills that don't overlap? So, there's a bunch of them, and I mentioned when you are practicing your public speaking, certainly you can practice on a live stream like this one. You're not going to have the same experience, but you will likely have the same set of nerves. They'll feel the same. The anxiety likely will be the same. And we all have it, whether we're getting up on a stage or speaking in front of a camera. Almost all of it have it. I don't really have it so much in front of the camera any longer, but when the stakes are high, we all feel nerves, or we all feel jitters. So practice in front of an audience, perhaps starting on a camera with a smaller group. Get a couple of friends together, get your kids and your spouse or your partner or your colleagues or whatever, and sit them down, get them a coffee, buy them a drink, whatever, and have them sit there as you're delivering that speech. And you're going to feel a little bit silly doing it likely, but you can't play around with it. Don't lean into that I feel silly element. Lean into delivering as if you're actually delivering with somebody in front of you. And I want you to practice. I would suggest practicing some improv so that you know how to handle situations that happen in real time. So I would always have a couple of sort of back pocket stories or one-liners in my toolkit, if you will, that I could, take off my shoulder and dig around in and pull one out and deploy it almost immediately if something happened up on the stage or when I was in front of the lens. So having some resources to lean on so you're not trying to establish them in the moment. You have something that you can use should things go sideways when you're up on the stage. And then work on your physical presence, your posture, the gestures, the way that you use the stage as your entire sort of stomping ground for telling your story, not standing white knuckling the podium and not moving. Practice using that entire space, because that's how, one of the ways anyway, that you connect with an in-person audience. When you are speaking on camera, you're practicing similar things, but again, they're executed differently. So eye contact. When you're in front of a stage, you're not going to be able to see every single person, but you're probably going to look at the room in quadrants and connect with some people in this quadrant. And then 10 seconds later, maybe move up here and you're going to connect with some people in this quadrant. And then you're going to go down here and connect with some here and then up here. And you're going to continue to follow some sort of pattern. When you're in front of the camera, you can't do that. I can't see you. But the way that I can connect with you and every other person who's watching is by looking into the camera lens. So when I look into that lens, I'm connecting not just with you with eye contact, but with everybody else who is watching as well. I'm meeting every single person in the eye. And too often when I see people still speaking on a camera, they're not looking at the lens. You don't have to look at the lens 100% of the time. Yes, if you have somebody on the other side that you can see, occasionally you are going to want to look down in the monitor and see what they're doing, and then bring your gaze back up to the camera and reconnect with the audience. But for example, I've watched this time and time again on LinkedIn. Somebody's releasing a video clip of their podcast recording, and I see the host and I see the guest, and neither of them are looking at the audience. They're both looking down at their monitors and they're looking at one another in the monitor. Well, listen, the host is not the guest's end user, it's the audience. And the guest is not the host's end user, it's the audience. They're forgetting that they're actually not just having this conversation to talk to one another, they're hoping to talk to other people. Remember the end user and look at the camera, even when you're on a podcast. Otherwise, when the audience watches that video clip, they feel like they're watching from the outside. They're not part of the conversation because the two people in the conversation aren't even looking at them. I know it sounds incredibly basic, but you have to keep that stuff in mind. Your audience is always here, always. That's where you look. Energy is another thing that is a big component of both environments, but I mentioned there's a flattening effect that takes place, especially on camera. And then you have to mitigate that, also recognizing that you're in a somewhat intimate environment, again, meaning the small field of vision, the ear is close to your mouth, the eye is close to your eye, the person is not sitting 200 yards away. That takes practice, and it takes a lot of practice to be able to do it well, to be able to use hand gestures in a way that are not distracting. And listen, I don't get it right 100% of the time. Nobody gets it right 100% of the time. You may be watching this and thinking, Carrie, you look really bored or unenergetic. Or conversely, somebody else may think, oh my gosh, you're so animated, it's driving me crazy. It's too early in the morning for this. There's not an objective right and wrong. It's finding out really what works for you. It's going to feel awkward again in the beginning, but what do you feel comfortable with? What are you talking about? And what is your audience like? And where is your audience? If it's, 11 p.m. for your audience, they're winding down. And how do you accommodate for that? Does it mean you wind down? Does it mean you spool things up a little bit because you're trying to keep them? I don't want to dive too far in this sort of rabbit hole, but there's a lot that goes into figuring out how you can deliver most effectively to the most people in your audience and also have them feel like you're talking just to them. So there's a lot that goes on sort of behind the scenes as you're bringing all of this together. There's a few resources that I would suggest. I am not a huge fan of Toastmasters. If that is what your budget and time allows, it's definitely better than nothing. But it is a certain skill set that is taught, and it's not individualized for the person. It's not individualized for their platform, and it's not individualized for their audience either. And those three things really need to come together to make you an effective speaker on the stage or in front of the camera. But if you're looking to get your toes wet and just expose yourself to the feeling of some of those nerves, that is a great place to start. Recording yourself is another one that you can do on your own time and doesn't cost you anything. You may know when you watch back that you liked this part of your presentation and not this part, but you might not know why. And you might not know how to replicate this, the part that you liked, and reduce this, the part that you didn't like. And that's where having somebody who understands audiences and understands your personality and understands your ultimate goals and where your skill set lies and can look in from the outside and tell you how to build on that. That's where having that kind of one-on-one help is beneficial. And also having somebody who can put you on a stage or put you on a camera and deliver a live stream. It's one of the reasons why I offer and strongly encourage all of my clients, once we reach the middle and the end of our time together, to join me on a live stream so that they can not only create content for themselves, but also, rather than just practice with me, introduce themselves to some of the anxiety that goes along with delivering as well. And so that actual practice in front of a real audience is huge. And people are scared of doing it. But that's why I offer it. I hope all of this made sense. There's a couple of questions, and I see for some reason the YouTube questions are popping up in my email notifications and not in the chat. So I want to read at least a few of them right now. And one of the questions is, how significant are technical aspects like lighting, sound, and framing? Do you have any beginner-friendly tips? Those are all important elements. I get asked this question quite a bit. In fact, I was just doing a presentation in front of Chief, the women's group, yesterday, as a matter of fact. And that was one of the questions that I got. And you really don't need any gear for getting on camera. Now, if you are a lawyer and you're hosting a webinar for potential clients, we're talking clients that are upwards of 7 digits or certainly multiple 6 figures, you're not going to get on a webinar and stream on your phone. That said, there's a lot of setups that I've seen with top tier law firms whose AV team is not really designed to do live streams or webinars. And there's a lot of mistakes that I see made. So you can't necessarily rely on your team either, unless they're very familiar with live streams and they know where you're going to be joining from and what the challenges are in that particular area, et cetera, et cetera. I digress. You can use a phone and a tripod. As long as you have good lighting and you have a face and a voice, that's really all you need. This thing, if you have a phone that's made within the past 5 years, you have broadcast quality video. You've got 4K, you've got 8K even. Where people go wrong is that they have bad framing, they have bad lighting, and they have maybe not great audio. You need to know how to frame yourself. You need to know what lighting is right for you, and you need to have decent audio. If you are recording on a phone, I would say you need to have some sort of external or plug-in mic. For video that has a very short shelf life, something you're going to be putting up on Facebook or Twitter, X, you know what I mean? Or maybe even LinkedIn, if you're just doing a quick vertical video and you want to shoot something and share an experience sort of spontaneously, you don't need to have a mic. But if you're going to create anything that has a shelf life, meaning anything that's designed to stick around for more than a day, you probably are going to want to have some sort of external mic. So something that is either a wired mic that plugs into your phone or plugs into your computer, the way that I'm using this now, or a wireless mic as well. Otherwise, it sounds kind of tinny and shallow, for lack of a better word. It just sounds amateur. Practice routines is the next question. I think that's where I'm going to have to end. There's about 6 others, but if you have additional questions, you can certainly put them in the comments after this live stream has ended, or shoot me a DM or email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. In fact, I'll do that right now. If you are watching from LinkedIn or any of the other platforms that are here, you can find all of this contact information on my profile. All right, so practice routines. I know that you are running a business, or you have a big role within your organization, or you're a founder and you're trying to get investors or develop your product or service. And so you don't necessarily have hours a day that you can put towards practice. Last week, I went through a very detailed practice routine, what you should do, how often you should do it, what skill set it is designed to hone. If you want to go back and listen, that's last Thursday, March 14th at 10 a.m. Eastern. You're going to have to scroll back through at least 7 posts to get there, but you can do it. I also release all of these live streams as a podcast, just an audio podcast. So if you want to go check out the Carrie Barrett Show on Spotify or Apple or iHeart or whatever, you can find the title and listen to it there. Without going into all of that detail, because it was extensive, the easiest thing that you can do is open up your phone and riff into it for 60 seconds a day. Doesn't even have to be business related. Riff about whatever. Nobody's seeing this. You don't have to get dressed. You don't have to do your hair, your makeup. You can be in your pajamas, whatever. Just riff for 60 seconds and go back and watch it. And don't get bogged down by everything you hate. Pick one thing that you want to work on. And let's say it's energy. Work on just energy. Work on just building your energy for the next few 60-second riff sessions. So maybe you try standing up and recording that way. Or maybe you try walking around and recording that way. Or maybe you try jumping around and dancing and singing to your favorite song before you flip on the lens. Or maybe instead of recording on this side where you can see everything, you record here so you're not distracted by your face. Maybe you find that helps bring you greater energy. Or you just start using more hand gestures, because anytime you create movement on the screen, you create a more dynamic visual, which even if you're not feeling energetic, will lend itself to showing up with energy. So maybe you work on incorporating more hand gestures, whatever that one thing is that you pick to focus on. And I picked energy because it tends to be a big problem. Then you work on that until you feel like you've made some progress, and then pick another thing to work on. Maybe it's you have trouble smiling, which you should be doing when you're on camera. Or maybe you have a lot of trouble remembering that you need to be looking at the camera lens and not yourself. Anyway, to answer that question in a very long-winded way, do that for 30 days. And then look at the first video and the 30th video and see how you've improved. And even recognizing those small changes, it won't be massive in 30 days unless you are an untapped talent and you had no idea that you were already kind of naturally good at this and you just needed experience. Look at the first day and the 30th day and you will see a change, right? And then that begins to build that confidence that we talked about. I can help you get there quicker and with less pain so that you're actually able to deploy the skills publicly in a much more efficient and effective way. But if you're just beginning to take those initial steps, that is where I would begin. All right, I hope this session has been helpful. I'm looking at what we're talking about next week and coming up on the Carrie Barrett Show Live. Again, it's 10 a.m. Eastern every Thursday. We're going to be talking about the impact of video calls and cameras on client sales calls, on pitches, on team meetings, on webinars, on virtual events, etc. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Hopefully not too much of the ugly, and hopefully not as much of the bad once you've gotten your arms around this skill set anyway. If you're interested in booking a free strategy call, you can do so at the link in my LinkedIn headline profile. It is calendly.com/Carrie Barrett Confident on Camera Strategy Call. I will put the link to that in the comments and in the show notes as well. In the meantime, thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.